Hello, everyone. I'm Rita, and welcome to our Friday Fireside Chat. A couple of housekeeping notes before I launch into introducing our guests this week. So this webinar is being recorded, so don't say anything you wouldn't want your mother to be able to play back later. And we do try to do that because people sometimes, the schedules get crazy and they miss them. So my guests are Greg Galle and Mike Byrne from a company called Solve Next. And I thought we'd mix it up a little with the usual Friday format, and they're actually going to share with you some very hands-on techniques for something I think is going to be just super timely, which is how do we think differently about the world now that we've all been plunged into a situation of just massive uncertainty. And I just thought their process couldn't be more timely, but we're going to try something new, so it's a little bit of a risk. We're going to actually try to have you interact, which we talk each other off ledges all the time. So, a bit of an experiment. So you'll see in the chat your instructions to get into, first of all, an incognito web arena, and then the tool that these guys have developed. So a couple of words about Mike and Greg. We've been working together now for many years. About 5 years now.
5 years.
What I've just so appreciated about them is their willingness to just think differently, open up different arenas of vision. They have a virtual partnership themselves. The main company called Solve Next is out in Half Moon Bay. And one of the things that they really are just brilliant at is kind of the next generation design thinking almost. So taking what we know about the world, sort of turning it on its side and looking at it really differently. And I thought I just love to use this venue to share with you all some of their thought processes. So let me turn it over to you guys.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting us. I am in Half Moon Bay. Mike is in Bend, Oregon. So we're getting all the corners of the country covered pretty well here.
Before you go on, what is in Bend, Oregon that everybody needs to know about? The world's last?
The last blockbuster on earth. You got it. It's great. Smells the same, looks the same.
Friday nights
Still got floppy disks. It is. It's great. Oh, we're already on to the blockbuster tangent.
Go ahead.
Reed, I was doing a little research for a piece we're writing right now about the 5 strategic COVID-19 mistakes that people are making, and so I was doing a little background work looking at the Netflix story that you tell about how Netflix has managed to extract value from the DVD business with DVD.com, and it actually last year represented over 6% of their total profit. The DVD business still. Which I think is 13 years after they launched the streaming business, they're still managing to get value out of that business as they're getting out of it. It's like, yeah, we're not getting out yet. So Blockbuster may just have one store, but Netflix has managed to really extract value out of that a lot longer. So Think Wrong, where should we start? We're going to actually start, rather than talking to you about Think Wrong, we're going to start by attempting to do this experiment that Rita was teeing up. And as she mentioned, we put into the chat both instructions for opening a private window, or in Chrome, it's called an incognito window. So there's some different key commands for getting one of those open. And then we also put in an address, a URL address that you can paste into your browser, into your address bar, and you'll get to this poster that is cryptically named DPAR, D-P-A-R, which stands for Deflection Path and Anchors in Rockets. We've mashed 2 of our Think Wrong exercises together, and we put them into one. And so now, if we have some 100 of you coming into this virtual poster at the same time, it'll be interesting to see what happens. If you have that up on your screen, if you've been able to access that, you'll see the first area that's showing up there is called predictable path. I see lots of cursors in there waiting and ready to start to tap something into that virtual poster. So what I'm going to ask you to do is go ahead and just start to type in how have you or your organization responded to the crisis that we're in right now? We're going to think about, given this current challenge, which is the crisis that we find ourselves in, how we responded. It can be the good, the bad, and the otherwise, we say. So go ahead and let's start to fill some things in here. If somebody's taken a line where your cursor is, just hit return and you'll find you have a new line. So working from home, yeah, remote work, moved to completely, I'm guessing, to online. Somebody put in capital press. I'm wondering if that's pressure. Capital preservation, yeah, that is a form of capital pressure, right? We're hearing that a lot. Brainstorming, remote work, calm. Dogs, yeah, my dog will make an appearance, as Mike's will probably at some point during the Fireside chat. So let's see what else we've got in there. Closed and rebuilding, thinking, learning, homeschool. That's been a huge pressure for a lot of people. How to balance that out. Mike has a young boy at home who's probably getting educated in the kitchen right now.
Yeah.
Yep. Lots of math through baking has been happening in Mike's house. Lack of communication. Yeah, and sort of new challenges in terms of finding ways to communicate. Brainstorming new opportunity spaces. That's great. Okay. Move to completely online work, offering, the anonymous giraffe is covering part of that, offered pro bono services, COVID-19 related work, great. Converted content to virtual vehicles of delivery, moving online, managing cash flow for sure. We're all looking at that very closely with the uncertainty around what's the duration of this thing going to be, what's the depth of it going to be, and what's it going to look like on our way back out. So I see lots of good entries going in here. I do see, I'm not seeing the links in the chat from Erica Wiggins. It may be based on when you joined. So let me, Erica, I'm going to repaste these because I think in Zoom, sometimes you just get the chat from the moment you came in.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, you don't get all the way back.
Yeah, so I'm going to attempt to.
There was a Q&A on that as well.
Okay, let me go ahead and. For some reason, in my Zoom, I'm actually not. There you go.
There it is. Okay.
Somebody put it in there. Thank you. My chat field wasn't working for a second. Thanks, Michael, for doing that. That's awesome. Oh, and Michael, hey, coming through. Of course you are. That was great.
Is this one of your folks?
Yeah, Michael actually went through the Think Wrong intensive recently. So Michael's down in Florida. He's a member of the Air Force.
Well, fantastic. Now we've added another dimension. So we've got East Coast, Florida, Bend, Oregon, West Coast.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Hopefully those of you who joined a little bit late, you'll see that link from Michael, the solvenext.com virtual poster. That's how you get into where we are right now. I know we're getting a few in chat as well. Launched telemedicine in record time across 75 locations in 10 states. That's awesome. Fantastic.
So Bill is a great colleague of mine from Birmingham, Alabama.
All right.
I see we have Marwan in. Happy Ramadan from Saudi.
Yeah. Marwan is here with us, even as the fast is breaking. That's dedication. So good to see you there. Dogs, homeschool, bandwidth, losing customers, holding cash, liquidity, PPP, SBA, fear, head in the sand, brainstorm, new opportunity spaces. We said communication from the top down weekly. That's great. SharePoint site with federal and local updates, imagining new problems, intrigued by restaurants of the future. So really interesting as we see this mix. I'm going to encourage those of you who haven't not had a chance yet to put in what your bold or your predictable path, sort of what it's like today, the current state. Go ahead and do that. And then if you can scroll down, for those of you who've already put in something on predictable path, let's go ahead and scroll down to the next section of this poster. And the scroll, it can be sort of tricky on this. It's over on the right-hand side in Chrome. So go ahead and scroll down and to the bold path section. And in that bold path section, let's go ahead and enter in descriptions of how would you like to see yourself responding and your organization responding at this point of time. So let's forget about maybe the way things are and think aspirationally about how might it be. What are our ambitions for how we would respond to a crisis like this, or in the future when a new crisis comes? What are our aspirations for how we might respond? And as I said, if you'll find sometimes there's a rush for space on this, go ahead and just hit return and you'll find your cursor on its own line. More empathy, thinking differently. More trust, I think was what I was seeing starting to get entered there. We saw, certainly we have a mutual friend with Rita who's in South Africa, whose operations moved to work from home, and the trust issue came up. They're really concerned about the quality control and quality assurance. And they found actually that the quality was higher when people were working from home, and the algorithms that they had to check quality were much better than the over-the-shoulder manual checks that they were doing previously. So they had a nice,
boss-free environment.
A boss-free environment, yeah. Without the stress of somebody looking over your shoulder, can be quite beneficial. Managers admitting to also not have the answer. That's great. More trust in systems thinking differently, looking at how we can learn from what's happening. Transparency, humility, direct leadership, all good. Those are great, thanks. One method to communicate. I'm sure people are getting overwhelmed by all the different channels of communication that are coming in right now. Having more technology. Yep. My wife teaches in a rural, fairly low-income school district, and the technology divide is certainly quite evident right now in terms of who can participate in learning online and who cannot.
Oh, Elena Alvarez had a raised hand.
Okay.
Allow her to talk for a sec.
Sure.
Oh, there she is.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Elena. Are you looking for where to put in information?
Yes,
okay.
Because I joined late, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, that's okay. I'm gonna once again, I'm gonna paste the, well, my chat seems to be behaving quite strangely. If somebody could go.
Oh, I got it. I got a connection in
Oh,
here.
Michael did again. Yeah, and Becky. Oh, hi, Becky. One of our colleagues joining us. Thank you. My chat's not behaving properly. I actually can't enter anything into it. Take the moment to make a big investment in innovation. Have more technology in the offering, more quickly introduce new technology tools for remote collaboration, constant communication. Executing options, understanding portfolio. So yeah, that's a big one. What we've been asking people to do is sort of reassess what's in your portfolio based on what your new goals are, and make sure that you actually taking the time to identify those goals and get aligned with them. More human, take more time for relationships, societal, purposeful benefit. So again, we are getting this opportunity to reconnect to some things that are pretty basic, right? Our family and our friends, and what it's like to be isolated from each other, and how can we continue life in this odd way that we're doing. So let's go ahead and add any more of your bold aspirations. How would you like to see people responding to crisis, both yourself in your organization, or more broadly, you can think, at a societal level as well.
Man, people are plowing on through this.
Yeah.
They've scrolled down. They're getting ahead of themselves. No, I'm joking.
So if we were in person, we'd be standing up with Post-it notes and putting things on boards.
We would be, yeah. We would be indeed. And Mike and I have had some conversations about the tools that are out there that replicate Post-it notes versus doing what we're doing here. And we found that the Post-it actually becomes unnecessary when you can type directly on your screen. So this is great. Build a stronger PM layer to our organization, implementing programmatic process instead of learned ones. That's down in Rocket. Somebody's already jumped ahead. So if you've already started to define this predictable path, what it's like in terms of how we respond to crisis today, and you started to identify the bold path, what are our aspirations? How would we like to be responding to a crisis? Go ahead and scroll down one more field down to anchors. So there's another section there called anchors. And what are some of the things that keep us stuck in the predictable path, that keep us stuck in the way that we react right now? What are some of think about an anchor as an obstacle or a barrier that reinforces an existing behavior or practice. We think about sort of assumptions and biases and orthodoxies, things like that are actually, holding us back. So I do see in the anchors, we realize the deficiency in project management. We need to fill that gap in order to help us develop the process. So that was an anchor, not having that project management capability in place. New social contract between employers and employees, more flexible time. That may not be an anchor. That sounds to me a little bit like a rocket. So maybe if you scroll down below anchors and want to throw that into a rocket, unless the contracts are somehow keeping you stuck and getting you stuck in a negative place, or keeping you from achieving those aspirations. Really getting you to know your team more holistically. Frustration is an anchor. It's something that holds us back. So fear, that's a big one. Fear is dominating much of our behavior right now, both in our personal lives and our professional lives. So we see that definitely coming in. Liquidity, the lack of it, the concerns about liquidity, security considerations, how much comfort there is with ambiguity. That's a big anchor. I think that we're not really evolved to deal with ambiguity well. So inability to plan for long term, inability to plan at all. I was listening to a conversation last night. It says, how do you plan with this much uncertainty? How do you plan? It just becomes almost impossible because there's so many variables that are unknown, so many assumptions that we're having to make. Let's see what else we have. Fight for survival, economic pressures. Those are all, so we're in this sort of flight or fight mode collectively. Fear of the unknown, fear of the new, fear of change. Some different flavors of fear are showing up here.
Lord of the Flies.
Management unwillingness to change. It's really interesting, even in this time, at this moment, when change is not only necessary, actually change is easier right now because you have permission to change, right?
Well, I like to talk about the great unfreezing, that, so many of the things that had been sort of baked into the way we did things before are now, everything's up for grabs.
Yep, for sure. Stories we tell ourselves about what we can and cannot do. That's a big one. Cost to change. Tradition of the organization. Yep, holding on to that tradition. Just sort of what our history and origin story is and what it tells us our limits are. Ability to connect with clients. So we see some anchors there. Let's go ahead and you can continue. You can scroll all the way through this. If you come up with a predictable path, sort of entry, or an aspirational bold path entry, go ahead and scroll back up. You can keep adding anchors, but if you haven't already, feel free to go down to the rockets portion as well. And now the rockets, what we think about, what we're building here, if you could imagine if we're doing this on a wall in a room, we would have a horizontal line that described our predictable path, and everything would be underneath that. And our aspirational path would be above it. And we would have just filled in a layer, a wedge, which were the anchors. Now I want to fill in the rockets. What are some things that could actually help us get to that aspirational state? What could get us up to that, those ambitions that we have? I'll change my background here to give you a picture of what that looks like when we're doing it live. So in a room, we'd be building this next wedge here, which is the rockets wedge. What are the things that can help us get up to that aspirational state that's above us? So building a stronger PM layer. So we have this thread on the project management capability. You have no choice, so change or die. This is the reality of the situation is a rocket, right? We're getting pushed to the future, whether we like it or not. There's no occupying the past right now. What we believe to be true has proved not to be so. So a huge number of assumptions that we made have proven to not be true. So it's time to make some new assumptions and start testing those, start learning from those. There is no status quo. That's great, Rita. So that's one of your quotes too, right?
Absolutely.
right now, the status quo went away. So one of the things that we'll talk about is this need to conquer the status quo, this need to sort of trick ourselves into letting go of what is, and we've all been forced into that. A rocket, financial security. So certainly the attempts with PPP and the disaster relief funding and other things that governments are doing in terms of subsidizing people's paychecks. In Europe, that certainly there's a strong move towards that. Just providing that level of stability, a certain level of certainty that people say, okay, with all of the uncertainty, we can. There's some things we're not going to have to panic about. That can certainly help. Trust your employees, especially as we all together in the unknown here. That's a big one. Trust, I saw featured a few times, trust and faith in ourselves and teammates and organization, being agile and resilient, deeply connecting with our stakeholders. 20 years of change are about to happen in 6 months. 6 months, that's a long time right now. 6 months will feel like 20 years. Reduced working hours in a day gives more time for side hustle. That's true. Actual inability to return to the way things were before forces us to do things. Customers' needs and desires have changed, so we're going to have to meet them or jump ahead of them. Creating mechanisms to constantly review projects and portfolios for whether they continue to make sense. That's a big one. That sort of having that portfolio view and having a criteria in place that's simple and light enough that it can be applied on a regular basis that will help us make decisions.
Well, and Mike, Greg, can I jump in here for just a second?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I've talked about in my most recent newsletter is a 5-step process. Just very briefly, very quick and easy portfolio review, because one of the things that happens after you've come off this just huge long period of expansion that we've had is your portfolio kind of gets like your closet, right? It gets full of junk. And without a lot of intense financial pressure, nobody's really bothered to take the time to sort of clean things up. So quick and dirty portfolio review. Revisit your strategy, because the strategy from 6 months ago may or may not be fit for purpose today. Then come up with some screening statements, and I encourage you to do that before you start making any decisions, because otherwise the whole process gets completely balled up in politics and preferences and blah, blah, blah. So if you can all agree on the screening criteria, then go through and rank order everything that's in your portfolio, above a certain threshold, and then start making some decisions about disengagement. Now, what that hopefully will do for you is give you some resources to play with. And that's what you need to then go look at the explore part. So kind of how do you now get into some new areas where your capabilities might be relevant? And then the last piece is really use a discovery approach, which the three of us have talked about a lot, to plan what those next steps look like. So if you're interested in this, you can find out more, either drop me a line or it's on my website. And it's all kind of laid out in an orderly fashion there. So quick and dirty portfolio review.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. That's consistent with the 5 strategic COVID-19 mistakes piece that we're writing. So you'll see lots of overlap in citations of Rita in that, and a big nod to discovery-driven planning as the 5th fix, right? So, and that connects to your recent article in HBR as well on digital transformation. So, so this is great. We've I think at least had half the participants in the webinar have managed to get into this, have been adding their thoughts. And so what we've done right now with this virtual poster, we've taken 2 think wrong exercises that we tend to run almost in every gathering that we have, at least, where we're looking at what's the current state. So when we looked at the predictable path in terms of how do we respond to a crisis, we were describing the current state. We were describing our as is. So that predictable path, if nothing changed, this is how it would look. And there are good things about it, and there are bad things about it, and there are things that we're still trying to puzzle through. And then on the bold path, we said, what are our aspirations? So we looked at, if we deflected from the predictable path, if we changed direction, what could we hope for? What in our wildest dreams would we aspire toward? And this is giving ourselves permission to imagine a better future, to imagine a future state, which is quite different than the way we are today. With the anchors, you took stock of what's holding us back into this reality. And with the rockets, we looked at what could we actually leverage and utilize to get to that aspirational state. So I can't wait for one, just to dig through everything that's here that everybody has offered up, because it's really helpful for us just thinking about how are we dealing with this and what could we be doing to get through. So I really appreciate the contribution everybody has made. That link remains live. You can keep getting into these posters and extracting things yourselves. The basic idea in terms of thinking wrong, one of the core frameworks for thinking wrong is this idea of the deflection point. And I see in the chat, I see lots of folks who are rejoining us. So hi to Brittany, hi to Elena, and Michael, and Stephen is in from Hamburg, and Erica Wiggins. We have quite a few people who have been through the Think Wrong training, so this will be familiar to you. And for those of you who aren't, we're just going to reiterate this one basic framework, and that is, when we're on that predictable path, there are two forces that are actually conspiring to keep us stuck on that path. There are two forces that keep us down, repeating the same sort of solutions, repeating the same approaches, and the first one is biological. It's how our brain works. So if we think about how we learn and how our brain processes learning, we make a set of synaptic connections. So we learn something and a set of synaptic connections are forged in our brain. And that's fantastic because it means we don't have to relearn those things. So, if we could ask everybody in the chat to raise their hand about who brushed their teeth this morning. I think everybody will have brushed their teeth. And most of us do things like that without thinking. We don't have to relearn how to put the toothpaste on the toothbrush and how to put that in our mouth and how to make the circuit. Maybe some of us have some mnemonics and some ways of remembering how long we're going to brush and make sure we hit all 4 quadrants and so on. But we know how to do it. Hand washing is a new one, right? So we have been learning hand washing. That's a nice relevant one. Okay, I'm going to wash on the top. I'm going to do. There are some ways to make sure you get your entire hand that we've been seeing. So we're learning these new things. We're able to do those without relearning. So the fact that our brain works that way is fantastic, except for when it comes to doing something new. And when it comes to doing something new, what we find is we slip into those neural pathways that have been formed in our brain, and we fall back to solving the problem the way that our brain has been wired to solve the problem. So the first problem is biological, and in order to think wrong, we actually have to trick our brain into considering some new possibilities, into trying something new that gets it out of that little synaptic connection rut that we have in there, that serves us extraordinarily well on a day-to-day basis, but doesn't when it comes to coming up with original or creative new thoughts. The other force that we're dealing with is culture. And if you think about culture as a collection of brains operating in that way. I'm going to change my background to emphasize that. So I said, I have a set of synaptic connections in my brain that goes from A to B. Collectively, we have a set of synaptic connections that go to our brains when it comes to cultural norms. So depending on the culture that you're coming from, you'll find, and you can think about this in a workplace culture as well as in a national or regional culture. Mike comes from Newcastle. So he was born and raised in a culture that believed in a football team that will never win. Not true. So he has a cultural bias towards this team, which isn't based on fact. It's not based on performance. It's just based on story and lore that gets passed on from generation to generation. And this is true in our allegiance to football clubs. Who do you, if you're in Newcastle, what football club do you hate?
Sunderland.
Okay, so there you go. So, and for no reason other than you've been raised to hate them. Like, I am a baseball fan, so I love the San Francisco Giants, which means I therefore hate the Dodgers. Now, there's no factual basis for my hatred towards the Dodgers other than the fact that I was brought up in a culture to do that. So if you think our cultural norms are really informed by a set of beliefs, by kind of a belief structure and a set of orthodoxies that are reinforced. And that we see that in workplaces that are trying to build cultures of innovation or cultures of inclusiveness, or right. We try to create a belief structure around that, and then we try to perform and act accordingly. again, our culture gets in the way. When I look at some of these responses, right, that have to do with a willingness to try new things. Can we get leadership to believe in experimentation? Can we, those, that's what we're hearing in those, or what I'm reading into those is a cultural resistance, a sort of a pushback. So at the very heart of thinking wrong is this idea of how do we overcome both the biological programming, right, the way our brain works, and how do we overcome our cultural norms to allow us to explore those bold paths, to allow us to go out and explore those new possibilities. And we always like to say that when you're on that bold path, if you're suggesting something that people laugh nervously about, or act uncomfortable about, or say is weird or strange or bizarre, you should take that as encouragement. That means you're on the right path, because that means you are by definition doing something abnormal. The predictable path is the normal. When we go off onto that bold path, we're doing something that's abnormal. It is pushing against the way our brain works, and it's pushing against the way our culture works to explore that. So that's the sort of underlying thesis of thinking wrong, is how do we actually get our brains and our cultures to think wrong? All of that, I think people generally say, yeah, that makes sense. I believe that. I buy into that. Rita, what I'm really interested in is the fact that we've had this extraordinary event, right? Where we've been forced into thinking wrong. We've been forced into this sort of area where the assumptions and orthodoxies and beliefs, somebody said it as we were doing that exercise, right? Everything that we accepted to be was true is not true. Mm-hmm. We'll all be able to go out today and gather at a bar. We'll all be able to take an airplane to go to Chicago. We'll all be able to, go to that medical conference in New Orleans. It's like, no, you don't get to do any of those things. Right. We're going to have a supply chain that's not disrupted. We're going to have people who can work free of fear of dying in a meat packing plant, right? All of those things that we assumed, we presumed, we just took for granted. We said, no, that'll be true in the future.
Into the grocery store.
Yeah, right.
So let me add on to that, because I think this is a very interesting insight that I've had, which is in today's world, it is entirely possible for you to achieve a very senior executive position. Oh, I'm glad you put that picture up there. Yeah. It's entirely possible for you to achieve a very senior executive position, having never done anything but operations. So you've been rewarded for being an excellent executor. You've optimized, you're efficient, you've, turned the wheels over and over again. And therefore, you have never had any contact with the innovation process. And I'm not saying this is anybody's fault. It is just, in a large organization, there's lots of room to do stuff that doesn't really involve innovating or doing anything new. And so what we've got is an entire cadre of people, and this, I think, is one of your anchors, who really are uncomfortable with the disciplines of, I'll call it innovation, but the disciplines of thinking boldly and thinking differently. And I think what is reassuring, and what I think you can use as a bit of a rocket, is the tools are there. The tools exist. We've been using them for 30 years with respect to doing new things, doing things that are different, doing things that aren't like brushing your teeth routinely in the morning. But most people haven't yet been exposed to them. So I think one of the things I'm really working on a lot these days is kind of convincing people that you can do this. It doesn't have to be risky. It doesn't have to be scary. It might expose you to something a little bit different. It might be a little embarrassing, but it doesn't have to be sort of fatal. So let me give just an illustration of what this might look like. So you may remember back in 2016, Microsoft was very curious about what human and machine interaction would be like in the future. And there's been a huge amount of speculation that one of the big inflection points to come in technology is we'll have interfaces other than keyboards. We'll talk to machines, or we'll interact with them, or we'll touch them, or we'll, some kind of interface that's different from keyboards. And so to learn about this, Microsoft decided to launch this little AI bot named Tay. Do you remember her? She was a young woman. She had a persona of a young woman. And unfortunately, they let this little chatbot loose on Twitter. And within about 24 hours, humanity had taught her to be this like racist, homophobic, Nazi. Oh, I mean, it was awful. So they had to take her down. And so Tay kind of disappeared from the scene. And it made
suddenly Clippy was back.
Clippy was back. That would have been even better. It should have had Clippy do it. Absolutely.
Come on.
It looked like you want to write a fax.
But anyway, what I thought was fascinating about it was Satya Nadella, the CEO, wrote to the head of the team that had launched Tay. And he said, look, that certainly didn't work out the way any of us expected, but based on the assumptions we had, it was a worthwhile experiment. We learned an awful lot about what not to do on Twitter. It was embarrassing, but don't worry. I think you're directionally in the right place and I've got your back. And so when I'm talking about, that was very embarrassing, but nobody died. No building fell down. No city was destroyed. Nothing awful really happened in real life. It was just a bunch of Twitter memes going around. So that's what I mean by you have to think differently about what's risky. And in that case, what he basically said was, sure, it was embarrassing, but we'll get over it. It's like, and I think knowing that is very, very different.
That obviously adds up to what the concept of affordable loss. What does affordable loss look like? And, for Microsoft, it's like, it's okay. That, it wasn't too bad. That was within the ranges of affordable loss for those, for the bet that they made. I think it's a pretty good criteria.
Yeah, and I think what there are a couple of words that you used, Rita, that I really like, that I think, because when we're talking about thinking wrong, people tend to think about, this is just about crazy idea generation and, the ideation stage of development, a word I dislike deeply. But it's, the fact of the matter is we talk about think wrong as a problem-solving system. And you talk about a systems approach and you talked about a disciplined approach to innovation. And I think where some of that unease, that discomfort comes from, in terms in leadership and in other parts of the organization is the fact that there's the lack of a system, that there's not a systems-based approach to how we do this work. And having a system is not antithetical to being creative and innovative. In fact, the fact that we're working within a system and we have constraints in place and that we're working against goals and we're having the ability to evaluate and a criteria that allows us to make an executive decision about whether or not something should be invested in or not, or whether something constitutes affordable loss, as Mike is saying, those are all critical to actually doing this work. And we have those systems on the operations side of our business. So I saw somebody put up the doers and the operators. We tend to lack them on the creators and the improvers side because there's this sort of feeling, there's a romantic notion of what it means to be an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, an innovator, right? And that's kind of the Steve Jobs black turtleneck, raise the Jolly Roger, pirate flag in front of the organization, and to hell with the rules. Well, in fact, if you went into Apple when Steve was there were a lot of rules. They were Steve's rules, right? And there was a system, and you were going to abide by that, and you were going to execute within that. So I think that managed, disciplined approach to this work is critical. And then the other thing that you sort of alluded to is the importance of having executives and managers and practitioners all understanding, hey, what is that system? What are our different roles and responsibilities? What information do executives need to make good innovation decisions about portfolio, the balancing of the portfolio, the allocation of resources of the portfolio? What do managers need to know to run a discovery-driven, planning-driven, project? Like, if we're going to use discovery-driven planning, then you better know what discovery-driven planning is and how to do it, and your leaders better be prepared for what it's like for that to happen. And think wrong contributes all throughout any of those development processes using any of those tools is the ability to escape our orthodoxies, assumptions, and biases, and to generate option value, to generate new possibilities. And that's where this whole idea of the portfolio thinking is so important, which is like, we're not working towards a single answer to a single problem. We're working on a portfolio of potential solutions to a problem, and we're going to make decisions about which of those are going to move forward, which of them are going to change direction, which of them are going to merge, which of them are going to slow down, or which are going to stop. And we're going to do that in a thoughtful way. But creating those new possibilities, creating that portfolio to begin with, requires that we have a little more imagination than perhaps we've had in the past, right?
So, question about artificial intelligence replacing accounting, and CPAs may in the future be offering business intelligence data and becoming more strategic. So that may be a Mike Byrne question.
What do you think?
Ponder on that one.
Well, we happen to know of a large unnamed accounting firm that is working exactly on that.
Yeah.
So I think this is true. I think that we will see AI replace quite a few accounting activities. Mike, think about within the insurance space or the accounting space, financial services. What do you think?
I think yes. Absolutely. It's if there's a repetitive task and there's rules, they can do it. I know people talk about ethics and things of AI. Well, ethics is just applying rules to things, and I'm sure computers are actually better than that than we are. It's kind of going back to the QA where we say a human has to overview that, and COVID forced people to work at home, and the algorithms sat on them and said, oh, the algorithms are just as good at this as we thought they were. I think you'll see the same thing with things like Wealthfront for financial advisors. That whole aspect of that is going to change that kind of that approach. But I think what people will move into is, and it's what we're seeing is, the idea of how do you set goals, how do you have strategies to those goals. That requires a deeper level of thought than simple transactional rule-based stuff. And the work that we do, that innovation has to be tied to a goal of why you're doing it. It's kind of going back to what you said about why do people not believe in innovation as a way out of this. It's because largely it hasn't worked.
If you look at pieces, they've done pieces of it, right?
They've done pieces of it. It's kind of magical thinking that we need the creative thing. It's like no, you don't.
Innovation theater, my favorite.
Absolutely, all of those things have happened, and it's But if you go back and you go, okay, well, what was that? What strategy did that innovation address? And that strategy was related to what goal that you had. And then people will say things, our goal is to be more agile. Our goal is digital transformation. And you go, well, that's not a goal.
I read a great.
If you don't have a proper goal, what's the strategy for?
Yeah, exactly.
And then if you don't have a strategy, what's this project for?
Right.
It's kind of also, we've done the crowdsource ideas. Let's do a hackathon. It's just like, well, if it's unhinged from strategy and goals, people are going to be disappointed by it. And that's why McKinsey's study says only 6% of executives are happy with their innovation performance. Mm-hmm. Or if I always look at you look at productivity. If innovation leads to productivity and productivity requires innovation, our productivity's been flat for 10 years.
Well, and so can I tie that back to a couple of things? And Absolutely. Then what I would love you guys to do is walk through the 6 practices, because I think that would be great. And then we've got about 15 minutes to sort of leave our listeners with some practical things they can do. But the sort of story about, where innovation kind of lands and where it doesn't is you really need to be able to connect it to some kind of corporate something. And what I always talk about with innovation is you actually have 3 practices that you need to be observing. So there's getting great ideas. Sure, it's important, but that's usually not the problem. I mean, as you guys point out all the time, human beings are incredibly ingenious. I mean, faced even with this current crisis, you see some of this incredible ingenuity about people pivoting their businesses and doing things differently. And I mean, it's been quite inspiring in some cases. So you need ideas, but then you need incubation. So how do you take an idea and put it into some format that somebody might actually be able to share with a customer and demonstrate whether, it solves a real problem or whether anybody will be willing to pay for it. And then you need to kind of get it to be part of the corporate parent. And so I call that acceleration. And the metaphor is really your main business is like an 8-lane highway and it's barreling along at 80 miles an hour. And your new little business is kind of on the on-ramp. And so you need to somehow get that thing up to industrial strength so it doesn't get mowed over when it tries to join the body parent. So you need somebody to manage bringing in legal, and compliance, and oh my God, we've got to have, the rules have to be followed. And so it's that phase change almost from going from being just a start to being something that's more robust. So 6 practices.
Sure. And we actually there was a question that says, do you see diversification to solve new problems being considered as innovation, or do companies need to leverage their strength, the current capabilities to solve relevant industry problems? I think the answer to that question is yes on both. It's not an either or. We definitely have some clients right now who wish that they had diversified their capability set a little bit earlier, that they had some businesses that would be able to generate some streams of revenue, especially in the aerospace and in the travel and leisure sectors, where industries where we're seeing that the lack of diversification is really hurting them. They're really struggling. And so I do think that there's looking at challenges that are some adjacencies away from your core business or your core strength, looking at those problems and thinking about what assets and resources and strengths do we have that we can apply against those in new ways. Definitely. That sets up one of the think wrong drills we often run called Asset Jam, where you take stock of all of the resources and that you have available to you, and then think about how might we apply those to entirely new sets of problems, entirely new channels for growth or opportunities for growth, which means some pains or frictions in markets that we might not have been addressing before. And I think that's really what it means, is looking at your organization and thinking about what are our core strengths and capabilities, regardless of the industry that we currently serve, that could be useful in other industries or in other markets. And then that gets to the second half of the question, Mohammed, which was around leveraging core strengths to solve relevant industry problems. So I think you can start within your industry, but you shouldn't be afraid of going 3, 4, 5 adjacencies away, given that you're going to have some strengths, and now you're being forced to think about where might we be able to actually generate some growth. Where might we be able to generate revenue by taking some of those assets and strengths and redeploying them or deploying them into in a new way? Mike, this is something that you and I talk about quite a bit, so I'm not sure if you wanted to piggyback on that at all.
I think it's one of the things that's presented is obviously the challenges that we face, but that also represents opportunities. I worked in insurance for a long time. You look at everyone's working from home now. Now we have an opportunity for someone in insurance to go, okay, what's the insurance product for workers at home? Because that needs to exist. I'm not sure it exists right now, or a different form, and how do you rate that? But now someone's got an opportunity to jump on that quickly. For instance, when we did Deflection Point, all those anchors we're talking about, they're actually pain points. And they're opportunities for people. It's like, oh, that's a pain. Well, that's a pain that needs addressing. So therefore, there's opportunity in that for somebody. So, you can go up to that poster and see all of those things. So I think those, I was just going with that.
That's great. Thanks. And you gave me a chance to change the background. So, so for Rita to talk about the 6 practices, I'll go through them very quickly. So if you think about, I talked about Think Wrong as being a problem-solving system. And in fact, we have something called the Think Wrong Lab, which is a piece of software that has, according to our marketing, about 150 drills or exercises in it. According to the tool, about 300. So there are quite a few exercises for people to use. Sorry if there's background noise. We're having a helicopter come quite close to our house right now. Coast Guard. But each of those drills or exercises is actually corresponds to a Think Wrong practice. And those practices are defined for at what point in the problem stage or solving stage are you at, and what is the need that you have. So being bold, any of the Be Bold practice and any of the Be Bold drills or exercises that we have really are around setting your aspirations. What are your goals? And pushing to be as aspirational as you can. Often we start a project without even thinking about, well, what's the why? Why are we doing it? Right? And what's the opportunity here? And is the opportunity significant enough to warrant the investment of our resources in it? So the Be Bold drills are really to help your teams get as clear about what the ambition for the project is as you can be. What are the aspirations that we have? Get out is a practice that's really around, okay, we know what our aspirations are. We know what our ambition is. We need some fresh inspiration. We need to get, and get out might be cruelly named right now, given that we're all stuck in. But there are ways to get out even at home, right? Just watching TED Talks, right? Watching the National Geographic channel, getting into virtual coffees with friends who you haven't had time to chat with and spend time with and get to, catch up and learn from each other. So getting out is sort of, how do you get out of your current environment and find fresh inspiration and new input? How do you feed the possibility with new inspiration? I think about that almost like a scrapbooking activity. It's like, I want to go clip inspiration from all sorts of corners of the world and pull them together, and then think about what might we do with those inputs? What might we do with what we're learning over in the agricultural space that might be useful in the entertainment space, or from the political realm that might actually be useful in the fashion realm? God knows. I don't know what that would be, but so how do we make sure that we're putting ourselves into a place where we can be open and receptive to new input? That's the get out practice. The let go practice is, all right, we're at the stage of, we've got our inspiration, we've set our aspirations, now we're working on a problem, and we just need more ideas. So let go really is the ideation bucket, if you will. All of the let go practice drills are about generating as many ideas and creating as many possibilities as we can. So this is where we want to be super generative. So anything that's in that practice is about letting go of the assumptions and the orthodoxies and the biases, those beliefs, those limiting beliefs about what we can and can't do, and just allowing new possibilities to emerge. And it's really important at that stage that we turn off that internal critic that says, no, you can't do that, or that's not possible, or that doesn't happen here. So the next practice is make stuff. So go ahead.
So for instance, on let go, Rita refers to this one in the book, which is brand takeover. So that's, we could never do that. So then we often do a brand takeover, which is, pick an aspirational brand for you. That's right, in your book. What would they do? How would they do it? So, I'll ask Rita, is there anyone right now, the brand that you're looking at, they have rocked this right now? You're so impressed with how they've pivoted on this.
I've been talking about Dyson.
Yeah.
Taking their electric car project, it made sense when they started it in 2015. 2019, the world has changed. They decided to shut it down. And then they decided to use those assets and talent and people to go into the ventilator business. Fascinating.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, you'd ask the question of, okay, what would Dyson do? What would Dyson do right now? And kind of, you need to know, enough about them to be inspired by them. So it's kind of that. Or we have a drill called verboten, which is forbidden. We often used it for designing events. So, how would you show up? And then list all the things you do and say, well, you can't do those. So what would you do now? Well, that one's been forced upon us. You can't get on a plane. You can't go to the office. Now what do you do? So that's a bit of a yes answer. Let go, Greg.
Yeah, thanks. So it makes stuff, again, if we're thinking about where are we in the problem solving continuum, it's like we have our aspiration, we have our ideas. If you ever find yourself in a team where you're spending a lot of time arguing about what the solution might be, and suddenly you're in like these PowerPoint wars where people are starting, I'm going to show you my presentation, I'm going to show you my presentation. It's like, no, let's just start making something. Let's start building something. So this concept of a minimum viable product or a minimum viable solution, start to create the simplest model of that, whether that's acting it out, whether that's creating a physical model, whether that's sketching something out. As soon as you shift from talking and from words to actually visualizing and modeling the solution, people are able to collaborate in a much more powerful way. Oh, that's what you meant. That's that color of green. I understand now. I was thinking you wanted bright green, and that would not work in this circumstance, right? So the fact that I can put something in front of somebody, a model that they can start to experience and comment and build on, is really important. The other thing in making stuff is you start to understand the true nature of the problem when you start to make the solution. Those two things can't be extracted. Mike does a lot of programming. And when we start to build a software product, you start to understand the nature of the problem through the construction of the product. It says those two things really are important to keep together. So that's the fourth practice. The fifth practice is, it's quite hard to see on the screen.
Interject in this one. So the other thing about the making, this kind of goes back to one of Rita's discovery-driven principles, which is you're wrong. Whatever you thought at the start is you were wrong, and you go into that mindset because it's like what you thought, and then say, oh, I just didn't think about that because the human mind is just not capable. So it's like just start making really fast. And that's where you're really going to understand. Don't sit there and make exhaustive plans because you're wrong and that's okay. So just kind of go in that. That's what you discover being wrong very fast through making.
Yeah. Now I'm mindful of the time, so I'm going to hit the last two pretty quickly. The fifth practice is bet small. And bet small is actually really important. It's sort of the key element of the discovery-driven planning process, which is we have an assumption. We're going to design a small bet, a little experiment to test that assumption. And we're not really going to be worried about whether we're right or wrong. We're going to run the test and we're going to see, does that make us more confident in the assumption? Have we moved to a greater level of certainty or confidence? Or can we actually move that from the assumption column into the knowledge column? We now know that to be true. Somebody had asked a question about KPIs and how we use KPIs. When we're in the innovation process, we're taking stock of what are the presumptions, what are the assumptions, and what do we know? And those are the things that we're looking for. And we're looking for learning from investment. What's the LFI that we're going to get by making a small bet and producing some more certainty and moving from that stage that all early innovation has, which is our assumptions far outweigh what we know. And we're going to try to be moving things over into that column and making adjustments to our solution as we go. And the final practice is move fast. And move fast kind of lies underneath all of these. You can do them in any sequence, but move fast is always present. And that is, how do we take the collective knowledge of the people that we're bringing together to work on this? And how do we lean into that wisdom and lean into their experience and lean into what they know and accelerate progress? And how do we share what we're learning from a discovery-driven planning process where we're making small bets and testing assumptions? How do we take what we know and share it with each other so we actually accelerate our speed to that impact, to that change? And that's a big shift for organizations to get over being closed and proprietary and secretive, but in being open with what they're learning. Let me tell you, if we're going to get out of this crisis, we need to do a lot more sharing, right?
A lot more learning.
To get to the other side. So move fast is really about what can we do to accelerate our speed to the impact that we're looking to have in a more open way, in a more collaborative way. So those are the six think wrong practices.
So if people want to learn more, where do they go? They go to your website, Solve Next.
Yeah.
You've got your book, Think Wrong.
book.
Which is a beautifully illustrated book, and it's got lots of drills and things. And I have the honor of having a drill named after me, so that was a highlight. My 15 minutes of fame go right there. So in sort of wrapping up, any words of inspiration or thoughts you'd like to share?
Oh. Mike, were you about to?
I think it goes back to your 5 points. I think we're all on kind of the same song sheet on that one, which is recognize that you have a problem, mm-hmm. and that you need to make a change, and that I love your line of the status quo isn't anymore. It's what was isn't. So you have to do something. If you just keep doing what you're doing, we have a term of capital leakage. If you just keep doing what you're doing, you are going to lose so much money by just not changing. Mm-hmm. So it's that idea of you've got to just accept the change. Then start doing it. Doing is going to be the first chance of getting through the other side.
Well, and I think for me, one of the big insights of the last few weeks has really been start somewhere. Start somewhere, and articulate your hypotheses and see what you can learn. So I want to thank you guys.
I'm just going to add, don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
Okay, because this is the mother of all crises. So it's like use it to your to your best advantage that you possibly can, because we're not going to get a time like this again, to be experimental and to try things that need to be tried.
And so I know these guys are open to follow-on inquiries if you guys have questions or whatnot. Sure. I certainly am. I'm very reachable, ritamcgrath.com. And I want to thank you. This was a great way to kick off a Friday. So
thanks, Rita.
Thanks, Rita.
Great to be with you.